Again, welcome to another one of the Maya Basics series. So in this tutorial we're going to look at actually moving around the viewport space and then translating primitives on screen. So in terms of moving around the viewport, Maya is pretty simple to a lot of pieces of 3D software. So what we can do is we can navigate around something by using the Alt button pressed down, and then we can either use the left mouse button just to rotate around an object or around the viewport. With Alt and middle button pressed down, we can pan around, and with Alt and right button we can actually zoom in and out of the scene or the viewport. You can also use your rollerball as well on there. Mine doesn't actually work very well on my mouse at the minute, but you can do that as well. What that tends to do sometimes is go a little too quickly, so I do prefer the Alt right click to move in, plus my mouse doesn't work. So that's the viewports themselves. Now this is different to actually translating an object, moving around the object itself. And when you're working in Maya, particularly when you're modeling something, not so much laying out a scene, but in modeling terms, you're always best doing this. We always move around the object rather than move the object itself. That can cause a lot of problems later on. So if we do want to move an object, we use these three buttons here. So we have our move, we have our rotate, and we have our scale on this. We also have just a select as well, which we can use. Make sure we're in object mode. So the keyboard shortcuts for these, which are really useful keyboard shortcuts to remember, are W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. These are essential when you work with Maya. You don't want to have to keep going over here when you're doing these tasks, because you'll be doing them quite a lot, especially when you start working on these sub-objects. So W, E, and R. If you do want the select tool, Q will select the select tool. So you can see over here that changing depending on which one I have selected. Now within each one of these, this is a gizmo, and this gizmo shows the three axes that we can work on in the 3D software. So we have our, in this particular instance, we have our x-axis, we have our y-axis, and we have our z-axis. Down here we have a little gizmo as well, and when I rotate the scene around, you can actually see that moving down here. Okay, so this just shows us where we are, and this can be useful in case you get lost within the viewport. So if you suddenly go upside down, note that this arrow is now pointing downwards. That can be quite problematic sometimes. It can cause a few problems in terms of just knowing where you are. So if you ever get lost, just have a look down here. Similarly, if you lose the x-axis, we can just have a look down here as well and see which one is x. So essentially within Maya, x is left and right, y is up and down, z is towards and away, essentially the camera. So with any of these, and I will show you this on the scale tool actually, so if I press R, so we have a different way of working with this. So if we click in the center of any one of these gizmos, what we're doing is actually working uniformly on this. So we're affecting all axes equally. So I click in the center and just move my mouse in and out. We're actually scaling this up or down uniformly. So we're scaling all axes uniformly. Probably more useful is the ability to be able to manipulate each axis individually. So if I was to go over just my x-axis, for example, I can just scale this in or out. Go over my y-axis, can scale this in or out, and my z-axis, scale that. And that's a non-uniform scale. We're only scaling on one particular axis at a time. If you move around this, we can notice that there are these other three little boxes, and these allow us to move on or to translate or manipulate two axes at once. So if I want to manipulate the x-axis and the z-axis, I can go over this one here, and then we can manipulate both of those two at once. If I want to manipulate the x-axis and the y-axis, I can go over this one, And if I want to manipulate the z-axis and the y-axis, I can go over this and just move these in or out. And that's the same with any of them. So if we move to the move tool, I can move on the y and z, so the x and z, sorry. I can move on the y and x, so up and down and left and right. And I can move up and down and to and away from the camera on the y and z. And the same on the rotation as well. Okay. There's another useful keyboard shortcut on this, which I use all the time on this the scaling. So we can also do this a different way, as well as clicking on these. So if I want to, for example, just scale on the x and the z axes, what I can also do is go over the axes that I don't want to affect, and with Control pressed down, I can now manipulate that particular gizmo or that particular axis. So that you can see here, these two are stretching in and out. We're not affecting the one we're actually hovering over. So similarly, if I want to move or translate on just the z-axis and the y-axis, I can go over the x-axis, keep Control pressed down, and move this in and out. Okay. If I go, just as another thing within here, if I'm translating or rotating any one of the axes, so if I just go, say, over the x-axis here and rotate this around, it's free, so it's going in kind of point or not point percentages of the rotation. If I do want to go in certain increments on this, we can just use the shortcut J. So if I press J down and now start rotating this, this is snapping to 15-degree increments. And even though it's not spoke about the channel box yet, I'll go over this in another one. If you just watch up here, we've got our rotation, and note that when I rotate that round, that's snapping to 15 degrees. Okay. Another thing about these controls, we can actually affect the way they work by double clicking on them. So if I double click, it brings up the options for this particular tool, and this is the case with most of the tools within Maya. So in our tool settings for this is given the particular settings for the move tool, and there's a number of things we can change here as well. I kind of leave this for now, talk about this more when we go over modeling, but just to note that you can do this. So if I was to just look at the rotation, for example, and double click on this, where I was actually doing the J tool, this is in this step snap here. Not allowing me to do it. Let me just see if I can do it. There we go. I need to click on. So if you just notice over here where you get this step snap, when I press J down, we actually change this, and basically we're switching it on and off. It's a toggle button, and there you can see we're snapping to 15-degree increments. If I want to actually change this, let me just change this to absolute, and if I want to change that so that we move to, say, 90-degree increments, I can just change that there. I can have that switched on there, and that will actually do that. So if I just move that, you can see that's snapping to 90 degrees. Or if I want, I can switch that off again, and then I can use my hotkey J. Make sure I switch that off. There we go. And then I can actually use my toggle key again to do that, which I prefer to do. I don't like to have my snap clicked on all the time. So let me just click this back to 15 degrees to the default. Can also go in this as well and just reset tool on a lot of these, and that will just snap it back to what it was as well. So let's close that down. The final point about these translations is just more just something to help you out. So let's just go back to the move tool. So each of these axes is color coded. Our x-axis is red, our y-axis is green, and our z-axis is blue. And an easy way to remember this is just with the color mode, RGB. So if you think of RGB, X, Y, Z. So R, X axis, so red is the X axis, G, green is the Y axis, B, blue is the Z axis, and that's the same down here as well. So that's just an easy way to get an idea of which axes you are manipulating at any time. And that's the end of this tutorial.